by without notice, Shanna being the other woman that Dave was seeing. And the two women exchanged only a brief passing glance in the hallway, and Dave didn't think much of it, because both these women knew that he was just casually seeing people at this point. He wasn't committing to anything. So Carrie would spend the night that night, and Dave figured life would carry on normally, but he had no idea what was coming next. So on the morning of November 13th, 2012, Dave left his apartment to go back to work before Carrie did. And before he left for work, he would give her a kiss goodbye. And the same morning, Dave actually received a strange text from Carrie. And in it, she abruptly proposed moving in with him, even though at this point, they had only been casually dating for about 2 weeks. And Dave was stunned, because this was completely out of character for Carrie. You think you know someone after 2 weeks, you know? But both of them had mutually agreed that they weren't seeking a serious relationship with one another once again. So he was like, what? Why is she just being all weird all of a sudden? Maybe he didn't really know who Carrie was. But he replied, and politely but firmly declined. And he said that moving in together was completely off the table at this point. And almost instantly, her tone flipped. And Carrie would fire back with texts laced with profanities. She would go on to say, fine, I hate you, I'm dating someone else, I don't want to see you anymore, go away. And Dave's jaw just dropped, because what had just happened? How did the funny, kind woman he'd been with hours before turn so vicious so quickly? And that evening, Dave returned home to find Carrie gone from his apartment, which was understandable after the vicious exchange they just had. So for 2 days, Dave kind of was hoping to hear from Carrie, mostly out of concern, but he heard nothing. But then the messages resumed, and Carrie began bombarding him with texts, saying, I hate you, you ruined my life, you're a terrible person. And Dave was just taken aback by the straight venom coming out of Carrie. So feeling very unnerved, he decided it was best to just cut off all contact. Probably for the best. And he would think to himself that he dodged a bullet, trying to just shrug off the unease of all those vicious messages. But he would have no way of knowing how literal that thought would become. So while Dave tried to move on, Carrie's family was growing alarmed, because Carrie had always been a very devoted mother to her 14-year-old son, Max, and she was very closely connected to her own mother, Nancy Rainey. And after November 13th, Carrie never returned home, and she would end up missing very important family events in the following weeks, including a relative's wedding, her own birthday, and even her son's birthday. So there was never any appearance, but only bizarre text excuses. Nancy would actually receive a text from her daughter, Carrie, saying that she had actually taken a new job in Kansas, which made no sense. So naturally, her mother, being worried about her, would try to call her, but Carrie would never answer, which was highly unusual for her, according to her family. And Nancy had knew that her daughter had struggled with depression and bipolar disorder in the past, and she warned Carrie might be in a crisis and off of her medication. So naturally, being super desperate as a mother worrying about her child, Nancy went to the police in mid-November and reported her daughter, Carrie Farver, missing. And initially, authorities were not urgent in the search, because the messages from Carrie's phone indicated she might have left on her own accord. And upon hearing of Carrie's mental health history, one officer suggested it wasn't uncommon for people with bipolar disorder to exhibit erratic behavior and take off on unannounced trips. And this just made Nancy really frustrated, because she knew her daughter wouldn't just abandon her life without a word. But for the moment, Carrie's disappearance was treated as a voluntary absence rather than foul play. Meanwhile, Dave, the man Carrie was seeing, continued receiving an onslaught of harassing messages from Carrie. And in the texts and emails, Carrie bounced back and forth between lonely pleas and frightening threats. One moment she'd write, "We belong together, Dave," and the next would be, "I will do what I can to make you suffer." So Dave, being, terrified, changed his phone number multiple times, but somehow the messages always found him. He did know she was a computer programmer after all, so she was pretty smart, but she seemed to just have unlimited resources in reaching him and had an obvious, very unhealthy obsession with him. So as weeks passed with no physical sighting of Carrie, she effectively became a ghost that lived in Dave's devices. And at this point, Dave and Shanna, the first woman he was seeing, started to grow closer because they empathized with each other over this actual terrifying situation. And Shauna claimed she too was receiving hateful messages from Carrie as well, accusing her of stealing Dave. And even on one occasion, Shauna phoned Dave in tears, saying her garage door had been vandalized. And Dave would rush over immediately to see what the graffiti was. And the words on her garage would say, from Dave. So this is obviously extremely unsettling to Shauna, so she would file a police report pointing the finger at Carrie as the culprit. Because, I mean, only an idiot would sign under something that they wrote terribly, and the harassment would just escalate further and further. Both Dave and Shauna would live simultaneously and get emails full of threats whenever they spent time together. And one chilling night, as Dave would try to relax on his recliner, a text would pop up saying, "I see you. You're sitting in your chair with your feet propped up, wearing a blue shirt." And this was exactly what Dave was wearing and doing in that moment. So creepy. But a prickling sensation crawled over Dave's skin. So the stalker at this point wasn't just behind the screen, but they were physically watching him. And by early 2013, the terror went beyond words. Because Dave would spot a familiar SUV parked near his apartment one night. And it was, you guessed it, Carrie's Ford Expedition. The same one that she met Dave when they went for a little meet cute at his shop. He now found it stalking him. So he would naturally alert police, who would examine the vehicle. And inside, they would find one single fingerprint on a mint container. But oddly enough, it didn't match Carrie or anyone in the law enforcement databases. So it was now as if Carrie had just evaporated, leaving behind only traces of angry digital echoes. So even as the messages continued, no one ever saw her in person. And while all this is happening, her son Max decided to message Mom on Facebook after having received messages that sounded off. And his mother would respond. But when he asked his mom also to verify his middle name and their dog's name, the account went silent. I love how a child is cracking the case more so than the police at this point. So to those who loved Carrie, it was becoming very clear that the real Carrie was not behind these messages, and something was very wrong. So over the years 2013 and 2014, the stalker campaign against Dave, supposedly by Carrie, intensified to a horrifying degree. And Dave's ex-girlfriend, Amy, the mother of his children, even received threatening messages herself, despite having no involvement in their love triangle. And one evening, while Dave had a romantic partner over, someone attempted to break into his apartment by jiggling the door handle. I can't just just up my spine. Yuck. And later that night, a brick was thrown through his window. And another time, Dave's auto shop was vandalized as well. So it seemed no one in Dave's life was off limits at this point. And the stalker's obsession with Shauna was particularly fierce. Dave got an email from Carrie with a picture of a woman tied up in the trunk of her car and threatened to kill Shauna. And Dave, seeing this picture, freaking out, thinking it's Shauna, would call her to make sure that she was unharmed. But luckily, she wasn't, and Carrie was just bluffing. But in another cruel trick, Dave received a link to a fake obituary for Shauna, as if Carrie was fantasizing about eliminating her rival. And then came the most drastic incident. Because in August of 2013, Shauna Goyler's house burned to the ground, tragically killing her pets, which she had 2 dogs, a cat, and a snake. And investigators would obviously investigate and determine it was arson. So Liz immediately voiced her suspicion that Carrie was responsible because she had been getting tons of threats, and so had Dave. And Dave was horrified that the stalker's threats had escalated to real violence. So fearing for his safety and his sanity, Dave armed himself with a 9mm pistol. And by now, nearly everyone believed Carrie Farver was an unhinged woman committing these acts because she couldn't let go of this relationship and rejection in the relationship. And for over 2 years, Carrie existed only as a vengeful phantom, tormenting Dave and Shauna from afar. So Carrie, the loving mother and talented programmer as she was known, was nowhere to be found. But the truth when it finally emerged, would prove more twisted than anyone could have ever imagined. So in 2015, with the harassment still ongoing with no sign of Carrie in the flesh, law enforcement decided a fresh look was needed. So Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Detective Ryan Avis and Jim Dottie volunteered to tackle the cold case. And they would approach it from two different angles. One assumed Carrie was alive, and the other assumed she was dead to cover all possibilities. And quickly, red flags would start to appear.